Rowena hoops. Yeah.
Never did that.
What college did that?
Yeah,
There's a college that does this.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know.
Rows the hoops.
Oh, I don't know of any college that does that.
No, there's one of them on graduation.
Oh,
But I don't remember which one.
Does Emma usually introduce people? Or do we
no,
just start?
Well, no, I have to just,
Just start.
All right, we'll just start. I'm Ann O'Connor, and this program is Warp and Weft. I hope you can see this. I had planned to do it on the TV, but we didn't have the right interface. So if you need to, you know, can do that.
Do you have a DVD?
No, I don't.
Oh, I thought you, okay.
No,
Because I can put it in if you do.
that's okay. I don't. So Warp and Weft, that's part of the process of weaving. The warp is the part that goes up and down. The weft is the part that goes in between. So during this program, I'll be talking about some of the society changes from the development of the textile industry, some of the technological changes that happened, and the impacts of how that worked with people. So I know that some of you have had different experiences with these industries than I am. If you have something you want to share, please do. I have 4 songs that I'll do in between. And when we get done, you'll have a chance to use a loom, handmade by me, to make a bookmark by yourself if you'd like. Some people make them into bracelets. I had a crowd in Springfield go wild making different things. So whatever you want to do, I'm good with that. So I always hope this is going to work. Raw materials. When the American colonies were first settled by Europeans, they came here because there was such a wealth of raw materials that wasn't there in Europe for them. So that meant more land to grow things as things got cleared out. And that was wonderful. So this is a picture of a flax field. It's kind of like little purple flowers. Does anyone know what flax is made?
Linen.
Linen, yeah. So I did see someone start the process of it, and it starts out, it looks like hay, and they have to beat the hard part of the husk of the hay off, and then there's the fiber inside that they can use. So that's a plant that's grown. There's another very important plant that we use in cloth. What is it? Cotton. So we'll talk about that too. Cotton is actually a bigger player in the industrial field because there's just so much more of it, and it's much easier to deal with than linen. The other natural fiber, wool.
Wool.
So, yeah, the War of 1812. Before the War of 1812, most of the wool that the United States used was imported from Britain. They had earlier machinery and industry to process the wool. They also had better fur-bearing animals. And the merino sheep, and we still have merino yarn today, was a very desirable wool to have. But those sheep were very tightly controlled. I thought it was the Spaniards. Another source said it was the Portuguese. But after the War of 1812, all of a sudden, people could bring the sheep here to America. So has anyone ever gone out on a country road in New England? Yes. What's by the side of the road on a country road? What you often see on the scenic country roads or out in the woods? You see stone walls. Because when New England got sheep fever, after they could start to bring these more expensive wools over, they simply cut down all the trees. And New England was something like 90% deforested.
Wow.
So if you look at the old etchings and things of mountains, you'll see that there's nothing on the mountains. And you look at those mountains now and they're covered with trees. And it was all cut down to support the wool industry. So how did they deal with all this wool? The first step after, we're not going to talk about cutting the wool off the sheep. That's beyond what I'm going to talk about. But that would be the first step, is to grow the wool and fleece it, to take it off. You have to clean it. Have you ever seen a sheep out in the
Yeah.
yard?
Very dirty.
They're very dirty. They're like covered with mud. It looks like they have dreadlocks all over them. So the first step is to get that dirt out and to get the fibers all in a straight line. It's a process called carding. And those are two metal, they have metal spikes on wood platforms, and they like do it back and forth to get them clean. So I think we can see that having nice cloth was very time consuming. Even the first two steps were very time consuming. So what do you do if you're a good mechanic? You think of a way to do it in bulk. So this machine is a carding machine. There's no cards there, but it was originally called carding because they were on those things. I found that up in Putney, Vermont. There's a craft cooperative that starts with the raw wool, and I have some to show you, and cleans it, and that's how they clean it, right through the spinning process and the weaving process. It's pretty neat. So what happens, sorry, I've misplaced everything because that's the way I work. This is wool that's been cleaned, it's been carded, and they make it into this, it's almost like a string. It's called roving. This is alfalfa, and this is actually kind of difficult to deal with. Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah, it feels so nice. Well, where does the purple come in?
Somebody dyed it. I just had it because that's a thinner roving. So and I'll just keep passing this around.
Okay. I can make a wig out of that.
Yeah.
Why not?
Just the shade you need. It's like silk wool.
That's a rough one, and this is a softer one. You'll see when it comes around. So, you know, the alpaca is what makes that very soft things. I don't think it's as durable as a merino wool would be, so when a merino wool will probably be more like that. I know that growing up, the thing to have was an Irish sweater. And that, now they're making them out of merino wool, and they're just not as
Stitchy, they're itchy.
oh, it was wicked itchy, and I have one, it's got, I think it was my father's, it's 50 or 60 years old, I got someone to fix it, but I mean, this thing is like iron, and it's full of lanolin, so, you know, the water doesn't come through, you can wear it right out in a snowstorm, it's a great thing, yeah. You give me a poke if I get in your way, okay?
Yeah, dye wool, and they must kick in the egg. I don't know, because I'll go like.
Just don't scare me too bad, you don't want me jumping and landing on anyone. Okay, yeah. So cotton
This is thicker.
has its own challenges. I only saw cotton growing once. I took a road trip, and when I take road trips, I drive places like where nobody should go, and it's really cool. And I went past a cotton field that had already been picked, but there were still some pieces of cotton there. And it was very prickly, and you know, you could see where like trying to pick it would really be a problem. And it ends up with seeds in it. So they used to go through a hand cleaning process with it. And then of course we all learned about Eli Whitney and the cotton gin. And so there's a gin. Do you know where the word gin comes from? Engine.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I went down to a place, one of the first spinning places in America.
It's a big difference.
Isn't it amazing?
Yes.
Yeah.
The only gin I know is the liquor.
I got gin.
So this just is to get the yarn, not yarn, it's not yarn yet, get it into a state where they can process it some more. What's the next step?
Dyeing it?
You could dye it now,
Oh, you can?
but you don't have to.
Spinning wheel.
Spinning wheel. So who runs the spinning wheel?
The women.
Granny.
Yeah.
The women, of course.
And spinning wheels are really cool, in fact. You've heard the term spinster. And that,
Oh.
yes, so that was a woman who never married, and she would spin. And that's, it comes from, you've seen the spinning wheels with the huge ones, and they walk back and forth to do it. And so if you go in old buildings and look in the kitchen, there'll be like a little path worn back and forth where the women would walk past with the spin wheel. So this is probably a fake photograph because we didn't have photographs. We're using those for real. But the way a spinning wheel works is that this big one goes around kind of slowly, and then it spins down with a bunch of other gears until it gets to the little one where it's going really fast. And I don't think you want to get that up close and personal, but I'm wearing my spinning wheel earrings. So when the biggest one spins, the middle one's faster and the smallest one is fastest. And so on a spinning wheel, it goes onto like a spindle. And so by the time that's going like 1,000 revolutions per minute or something, by the time it spins down from the big wheel, it's one of the first technological things that, used gearing like that. So there's Granny. And this is one of the first industrial spinning looms. And so it would spin it. This is not a spinning jenny, that's another thing. There were a couple different technologies that they used. The people who worked those were called operatives. People who ran the looms were called operatives. That's cool. So, welcome to Rhode Island. Slater's Mill started in 1793. And it's still there. It's a tourist attraction now, and they do very good presentation there if you're interested in it. And it's a lovely spot. It's in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. But let me tell you about Mr. Slater. We always think of the early industrialists and all of the early heroes as being fine, upright men. Well, Samuel Slater was a thief, but he was also the father of the industrial age. Some of the earliest mills, spinning mills, were in Manchester, England. And a lot of the people who worked in these mills would later come to America and work in the mills here. He came before there were any mills. And this was very closely guarded technology. But he must have had a photographic memory because he came here and he recreated it. And not only did he recreate it, he and the people working with him managed to improve it. The mills in England were run by rods, by big iron rods that would make the machinery spin. So they would go up and down. Here, our mills are run on pulleys. So if a pulley breaks, the machine stops. If an iron rod breaks, that's a catastrophe. It's difficult to replace, it could kill somebody. So improvements kept being made, which is a wonderful thing. So who were the people who were working in the early textile industries? They were the people who were here.
Women.
Women. A lot of them were women. Not only was it, some did piecework at home. When I used to write for the newspaper and I covered Townsend, Massachusetts, someone said, oh, a lot of people used to make palm hats here. I said, okay. And it turns out that was something that a farm wife would do in the winter. You know, you could do it in your spare time, you could make a little extra money. So one of these is for making things out of straw. The other one is for people to make lace, and they would provide the machinery for someone to use in their home. So it was still piecemeal. Then people started to come into the factories to work, which was the beginning of our industrial age, and a complete change in how society was formed, because all of a sudden people were not on the farm with their day determined by what the chickens were up to, but they had a factory bell to go to. So when they first started, we'll see some pictures of Lowell, which was one of our first factory cities later. But, you know, everybody wanted to get married, have their family, do their thing. And all of a sudden, they didn't have to anymore if they didn't want to. This is an English folk song that I first heard on a recording by Eric Burden, who was the singer who did the song, we all know it, The House of the Rising Sun, which is also, it's a blues song. This is a folk song. As I went a-walking one fine summer's morning, the birds in the bushes so sweetly did sing. The lads and the lasses in couples were courting, going down to the factory their work to begin. I spied one among them, more fairer than most, her cheeks like the red rose that none could excel, her skin like the lily that grows in yon valley. She was only a hard-working factory girl. Guy's not gonna give up. I stepped up beside her more closely to see her, when on me she cast such a look of disdain. Oh, young men, have manners and do not come near me, for though I'm a poor girl, I think it no shame. With those words she turned, and with that she left me, and all for her sake I'll go wandering away. And in some deep valley where no one will know me, I'll mourn for the sake of my factory girl.
Very nice.
Isn't that a pretty song?
Yes, very nice.
There's more than one version of this. In Eric Burden's version, he gets the girl. And they have a family and live above the factory and watch the factory. But, you know, I'm Irish, I'm always depressed, so I do the sad one. Okay. So, from thread to cloth, you need a loom. And so I've brought a whole, I don't know, like they started multiplying in my house, and I have a whole bunch of looms. These are all hand looms. You can go around in a circle, you can have a big tall one, you can have, this is very similar to what we'll be doing with a cardboard one. And basically all it is thread or something that's stretched tight, and then you weave back and forth in between them. Depending how you do that, you can change the pattern.
Isn't that something like when I was a kid, I used to do pot holders?
I got one of those here too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's loops that you just run through it.
I
Yeah,
used to make pot holders.
Yeah.
I remember.
yeah, it's fun. I don't know how to finish them though, because I don't know how to crochet.
Oh, you have to crochet them. Oh.
Well, you have to crochet the ends or it'll just unravel. Yeah. So this is just a regular loom that somebody might have one like that in their home. And this is a little itty bitty like demo loom
Oh, cute.
that shows some of the parts.
Oh,
Yeah, so these blue things go up and down, and the thread passes in between, so depending how you thread it up will be the pattern that comes in your cloth.
oh.
So
you could go like over 2 and under 3 or whatever you want it to do. I just set it up every other one because I'm boring.
far from it.
I'm not handy with these things. I like them, but I'm not handy with them. So this thing is a flying shuttle. We're going to be talking more about that one. That's an important thing. So one of the biggest jobs at the mill, one of the most important jobs by the time we get to a mill with a loom on it, is putting those warp threads on. Because when a bolt of cloth gets done, it's a great big, I don't know how many yards are on one of the great big bolts that come on. And that thread has to start from the very one end of it to the other. So it's a very fine thread depending what you're making. So it's a thing like this that it wraps around, but I mean there's got to be thousands of thread, like in a sheet that goes all the way across.
Wow.
And somebody has to wrap those on. So that was a big job, and that was reserved for the men. And you can see this guy, this is not all that old based on his clothing. You know, maybe 1940s. So I'm popping right over to Lowell. The reason for popping right over to Lowell is it is one of the very first planned industrial cities in the United States. It has, if you have any Irish blood in you, very good chance that your ancestors came through there. I found that I had a great-great-grandfather who was born there, fought in the Civil War from there. And they don't count when they write about the city of Lowell, so it's pretty interesting. But when they first started it, they wanted it to be a different place than Manchester, England. The industrialists said, we're going to have a nice place. It's going to be peaceful. It's going to be a nice place. We're going to have they had the Yankee farm girls who would come down. And, you know, they were supposed to work for a couple of years, get some money for a dowry, and go back up and save the family farm. They had boarding houses where these women lived, where they were fed well. They had all kinds of enrichment there. They had speeches and they had plays, and the mill girls wrote their own periodicals. It was very much an intellectual as well as, you know, an industrial place. And that was the very first stuff that we had here. That's a horrible way to put it, stuff, but it is. Charles Dickens came to Lowell in 1842, and he was just wild about it. Charles Dickens wrote a lot about the mill conditions in England and how difficult and bad and poor the life quality was, and he didn't find that here. And if you look at this etching, if you can see it, I think I can make it a little bigger. You can see, I mean, it looks nice. There's factories in the back, there's nice trees in the front, there's the river, and it looks like it would be a decent place to live. Yeah. Okay. But things started to change. I'm going to just go back one, if I can. No, we'll just stay here. So, Civil War and abolition. We said that Dickens was there in 1842. Between 1842 and the beginning of the Civil War, we had immigrants who started to arrive. A lot of Irish arrived during that time. The famine, the Great Famine, the peak year of that was 1847. The mill owners were most interested in turning a profit. They started to pay the operatives, the Yankee women, less. They made them work on more machines. And the girls had it, they left. And other immigrant labor who had no protection and would work for cheap because they had to, they were hungry, came in and conditions changed. Then we had the Civil War and abolition. There was a very close connection between New England textile manufacturers and the plantation economy. Where did cotton come from? The South. Okay. So one of the major products, textiles, at least in Fitchburg, and I assume in Lowell and in other places, was a cheap kind of cloth that was called linsey woolsey, or Negro cloth. And what it basically was cotton thread for the warp, which is, this is a cotton thread warp, which was strong, and then some cheap wool that went back and forth, and they sold it back to the South. So it was a very interdependent economy at that point. And not all New Englanders were pro-abolition, and there were real economic reasons for that. So it affected the textile industry and, you know, what they were looking at. But by that time, we had these huge cities. We had Lowell, we had Lawrence. We had smaller cities like Fitchburg that rather than these big corporations from Boston coming in and starting the factory, people in the cities and towns would just start their own factories. They could figure out how to make the machinery. They had a labor force, and they just went for it. Who's from the Springfield Longmeadow area? What kind of industry was here originally?
Machine shops.
Machine shops. Why machine shops? Why would machine shops be very important at this time? There was no Amazon Prime. If you wanted a machine, you had to build it. If it broke, you had to fix it. So machine shops were very good. Also, right in this Connecticut River Valley was had a machine shop. Yeah, I'm sure it did. Paper and guns.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, Smith & Wesson down in Hartford. You had the Springfield Armory.
Savage Arms.
Which arms?
Guns.
Guns.
Savage Arms.
Savage Arms? Where was that?
In Springfield.
Was it? Okay. All right, because I've been to the Springfield Armory, but I didn't retain that. Smith & Wesson. Yeah.
Yeah.
Colt, I guess
Savage
Colt
Arms.
was in Hartford, which is also right along.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, some of it kind of got switched around. In Fitchburg, we had started out as a gun manufacturer called Ivor Johnson, then he started making bicycles. And I have a friend who collects them, and we did a documentary on it, and everything was pretty cool. He was
Where does
Swedish.
the cashmere come from?
A goat, or a rabbit.
No, I think
What?
so.
Cashmere.
Cashmere.
I think it's goat.
It's very
Cashmere
expensive.
wool.
Yeah, I think it's wool from a goat.
No, I don't think gold would.
I don't know. Llama? Llama.
That's not cashmere.
The alpacas.
Alpaca, that's the one we had. They're like a little camel thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so expensive too.
It's wool.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
It's
just
a
think if
wool.
you're just taking the stuff from the goat's belly, there's not much of it.
Oh.
Oh.
Alpacas. Little tight.
Yeah.
Alpaca's a tighter looking thing, more so than a llama. Yeah.
Yeah. So, workers' lives. This is a picture of Lowell, 1911. And these are boys. These are mill boys. And they made their living that way. There was a very prominent photographer who ended up documenting a lot of this, Louis W. Hine, and that they've collected some of his photos together of the child workers, not just in cities, you know, the boys in the mills. They had like girl oyster shuckers and newsboys, you know, because it was not a time when they cared if the children worked. They had to support the family. That was it. They worked. Massachusetts was on the forefront of having strong labor laws, and from very early times, we had the first child labor law that said children had to go to school at least 3 months a year. And some of that goes, and this is interesting, goes right back to our Pilgrim beginning, because one of the reasons that Pilgrims existed was they believed that you should read the Bible for yourself. So everybody in Massachusetts, back like in the 1600s, was expected to read well enough to be able to read the Bible. So education became a very important thing in Massachusetts, and it carried in through labor. But, I mean, it wasn't perfect. I spoke to a woman who, she's probably in her 70s now. She came down from New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, I don't know. She's French-Canadian. She came down, and she landed in Leominster. And they put her to work at the Peabody Shirt Factory. And she said, yeah, but I'm only 14, you've got to be 16. And her family says, just tell them you're 16. You know, because it was more important that she work
Needed the money.
than she finished school. So overcrowded living. We saw Lowell, that picture was what, 1840 something? This is what it looked like in 1876. lots of mills, lots of tenement housing, unsafe conditions.